For 80 years, one question has ignited endless arguments among historians, pilots, and aviation obsessives. Which World War II fighter was the fastest machine ever to roar across the sky? Not experimental designs, not paper concepts, not prototypes that never fired a single shot. Only the real beast fighters that flew, fought, and pushed their pilots to the absolute edge. And now, we count them down, in the fading months of 1944, as Germany's skies burned with contrails of enemy bombers, a new silhouette appeared, long-nosed, sleek, and unmistakably lethal. This was the Focke-Wulf FW-190D, the fighter that opened our list at number 8. Pilots called it the Dora, and even at first glance, it was clear this was not the brutish, radial engine FW-190 that had clawed its way through the early war. The Dora was built for height, speed, and survival in a collapsing Reich. A Junkers Jumo to 138 engine stretched the nose, changing the aircraft's center of gravity and giving it a distinct, predatory look. Early FW-190s were low-altitude warriors, fast, tough, vicious in a turning fight. But the Dora was something else entirely. It hunted bombers at altitudes where the air thinned and engine starved. With a top speed of 426 miles per hour, it gave Luftwaffe pilots one last weapon to throw against the endless waves of allied aircraft. More than 700 Doras rolled out despite shattered factories and dwindling fuel supplies. Their pilots flew from improvised airstrips, often strafed before they could even take off. Yet in those final battles, the Dora showed flashes of brilliance, diving hard, striking fast, and fighting with the fury of a cornered nation. It stood as proof of what German engineering could achieve even as the world collapsed around it. Our journey continues with the fighter that claimed the number 7 position, the British Hawker Tempest MKV, a machine born from the frustrations of its predecessor. The Typhoon had power, but it suffered under the weight of a thick wing and structural flaws. Engineers remade it into something extraordinary. The Tempest emerged with a slimmer wing, a refined frame, and the monstrous Napier Sabre engine at its heart. This aircraft became Britain's scalpel and hammer. At low altitude, nothing in the light service could catch it. And just in time, because a new threat buzzed across the channel, the V-1 flying bomb, the Tempest tore into these drones with ruthless efficiency. More than 800 V-1 South fell to Tempest guns, their fiery remains tumbling into empty fields and quiet coastlines. Some pilots even tipped the bombs with their own wingtips, flipping them off course when ammunition ran low. But the Tempest was not just a defensive champion. It surged across Europe in 1945, cutting down German fighters and wreaking havoc on retreating forces. Fast, stable, and deadly in the hands of skilled pilots, it earned a quiet consensus among those who flew it. This, perhaps, was the finest piston-engine fighter. The word Spitfire conjures an image, a sleek Merlin-powered guardian soaring over the white cliffs of Dover. But the Spitfire, that takes number 6 on our list, was no gentle guardian. It was a transformed beast, the Spitfire Mk XIV, the variant that took the iconic design and pushed it to its absolute limits. This transformation began with one change: the engine. The graceful Merlin was replaced with the Rolls-Royce Griffon 65, a power plant so large and powerful it seemed almost too much for the Spitfire's slender frame. Over 2,000 horsepower poured through the propeller, doubling the output of the Spitfires that had saved Britain in 1940. The airframe had to be strengthened, the tail enlarged, and the nose reshaped to tame this new force. The result was astonishing. The Mk XIV climbed like a missile and accelerated with a ferocity that shocked German pilots. Reconnaissance aircraft that once outran everything Britain possessed suddenly found a Spitfire filling their gun sights. Early German jets, fast and elusive, discovered that the Griffon-powered fighter could reach them before they could escape into the safety of altitude. More than 900 Mk rolled into service. Over Europe, they escorted bombers, intercepted high-altitude raiders, and swept ahead of ground forces as the Allied armies advanced. In the east, they battled heat, humidity, and Japanese fighters, proving the design's unmatched adaptability. Pilots called this Spitfire the ultimate evolution of the breed of Predator, not just a defender, a fighter that retained the Spitfire's grace, but carried the heart of a powerhouse. As the war surged into its final year, a new American fighter appeared that looked almost impossible. It was compact, muscular, and built around one of the greatest radial engines ever produced. This was the aircraft that earns the number 5 position on our list, the Grumman F-8F Bearcat. If the Dora and the Tempest were late war evolutions, the Bearcat was something else entirely, a pure expression of American power and efficiency. Imagine an aircraft designed by starting with an engine, nothing else, and then building the smallest, lightest frame around it that could possibly survive the forces it generated. That was the Bearcat. Engineers at Grumman took the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, delivering more than 2,100 horsepower, and asked a single question: how fast could a carrier fighter become if every ounce of unnecessary weight simply vanished? The answer arrived in February 1945. The Bearcat leapt into the sky with a fury pilots had never experienced. It climbed to 10,000 feet in just 94 seconds. Its roll rate was astonishing. Its acceleration was brutal. And yet it handled like a dream, responding instantly to even the slightest movement of the stick. With a top speed of 455 miles per hour, the Bearcat became one of the fastest piston-engine fighters America ever built. But the war was ending. By the time the Bearcat reached operational squadrons, only 24 aircraft had been delivered. Japan surrendered before the fighter ever saw combat. Still, its impact lived on. Test pilots described it as the finest handling piston fighter they had ever flown. The Blue Angels adopted it as one of their earliest mounts, and in the post-war years, Bearcats tore across air race circuits, setting time to climb records that stood for decades. It was a machine built to dominate a war that ended just before it could prove itself. Our countdown continues with the fighter that takes the number for spot, a predator of the upper atmosphere, a machine forged in desperation, built to chase the bombers that rained destruction on German cities day after day. This was the Focke-Wulf Ta-150H, one of the most extraordinary and rare fighters ever to take to the skies. The Ta-152H was born from a simple crisis. Germany's best fighters were suffocating above 30,000 feet. American B-17s and B-24s, escorted by P-47s and P-51s, operated at altitudes where the Luftwaffe's aircraft struggled to climb and struggled even more to breathe. Something had to change. Focke-Wulf's answer was radical. They stretched the wings to nearly 48 feet across. They pressurized the cockpit. They installed the Junkers Jumo To-13 East engine with a 2-stage supercharger designed to claw every bit of oxygen from the thin, icy air. At these heights, the Ta-150H was terrifying. It could outrun, outclimb, and outmaneuver almost anything in the sky, reaching a top speed of 469 miles per hour. When other fighters faltered in the freezing stratosphere, the Ta-150H surged ahead with predatory control. Yet very few were built, perhaps 150 in total. Fewer still reached the front lines, and only a small handful ever saw real combat. But those few encounters earned the Ta-150H a kind of mythic status. In one recorded battle on April 14, 1945, a lone Ta-150H piloted by Oberfeldwebel Willy Reschke engaged for P-51 Mustangs at altitude. He shot down 2, damaged a 3rd, and escaped unscathed. For Allied pilots, it was a chilling sign of what German engineering could still produce even in the war's final, crumbling weeks. Yet the aircraft arrived too late, produced in too small numbers, and flown by pilots who often lacked fuel, training, or even safe airfields. The Ta-150H was a masterpiece trapped in the ruins of its own nation's collapse. Had it appeared just a year or two earlier, it might have reshaped the air war over Europe. Instead, it became one of aviation's greatest what-ifs. And now our countdown reaches the top 3 fighters, the fastest of a generation. The machines that push propeller technology to the absolute edge of physics. By late 1944, the skies over Europe had become a battleground of extremes. Allied bombers pushed deeper into German territory. German jets appeared in sudden bursts of speed and vanished just as quickly. High-altitude raiders slipped above the reach of many Allied fighters. Something faster was needed, something built not just to survive, but to catch what had never been caught before. That mission gave birth to the fighter that takes the number 3 position on our list, the Republic P-47M Thunderbolt. The Jug had always been a legend, massive, tough, a flying fortress of radial power and 8 heavy machine guns. But the earlier variants, while effective, were no match for the fastest German aircraft emerging late in the war. Interceptors, reconnaissance planes, and even experimental jets began outrunning the P-47D. Republic aircraft responded with a version that pushed the airframe to the edge of physics. The P-47M wasn't just an upgrade, it was an engine wrapped in the skin of a fighter. Engineers installed a modified Pratt & Whitney R2857 engine equipped with an improved turbo-supercharger and water injection, unlocking emergency power that propelled the aircraft to a staggering 472 miles per hour. Weight was trimmed wherever possible, systems were refined. The entire design was focused on one purpose: chase, intercept, destroy. Only 130 P-47Ms were built, all delivered to the elite 56th Fighter Group, the same unit that had refused to switch to the P-51 Mustang because they had mastered the Thunderbolt so completely. When the new variant arrived, pilots quickly realized they were dealing with a creature far more temperamental than the rugged D model they were used to. Early flights were plagued with engine failures so severe that the entire fleet was grounded. For a moment, the project seemed doomed. But once the problems were corrected, the P-47M became one of the deadliest interceptors in Europe. It tore into Luftwaffe formations, chased down high-altitude intruders, and proved capable of engaging even Germany's early jets in certain conditions. It remained as tough as any Thunderbolt, able to take hits that would shatter lighter fighters, and yet it moved with a speed earlier pilots had only dreamed of. In the hands of the 56th, the P-47M wrote its own legend in the final months of the war. Our journey now reaches the number to position a place reserved for an aircraft unlike any that flew during World War II. If the P-47M pushed engine technology to its limit, this next machine tore up the rule book entirely. It was an aircraft with two engines, but only one propeller in the front and another in the back. A design so unusual that Allied intelligence at first believed it to be a mistake. This was the Dornier Du 335 Pfeil, the Arrow, the fastest piston-engine aircraft Germany ever produced. While other fighters relied on a single power plant, the Du 335 used a revolutionary push-pull configuration, one Daimler-Benz engine in the nose driving a tractor propeller, and a second engine behind the cockpit driving a pusher propeller at the tail. This unique arrangement eliminated the drag of wing-mounted engines while doubling the thrust. The effect was astonishing. The Du 335 sliced through the air at 474 miles per hour, a speed so high that Allied test pilots after the war called it effortless, as if the aircraft was barely working to reach velocities that other fighters struggled to achieve. Yet the Arrow was not simply fast, it was heavily armed, carrying cannons powerful enough to tear apart bombers in a single pass. Its cockpit was reinforced. It had explosive bolts to jettison the rear propeller in an emergency. It was designed to climb quickly, strike hard, and outrun anything that pursued it. But, like many of Germany's late-war marvels, the Du 335 arrived far too late. Development delays, shortages of materials, and a collapsing industrial base meant that only around 37 production aircraft were completed. Most never saw combat, a few were flown on evaluation missions. Their performance was confirmed, admired, and feared. But they never had the chance to prove themselves in true wartime conditions. Allied pilots who tested the Arrow after the war spoke about it with a mix of awe and frustration. This was a machine that could have changed the air war had it appeared even a year earlier. Instead, it became a technological ghost, an example of what Germany might have fielded if time, resources, and fate had unfolded differently. And now, with the Arrow behind us, only one aircraft remains, the fastest propeller-driven fighter ever to fly in World War II, the machine that pushed piston-engine technology to its final, astonishing peak. At the very end of World War II, as jet aircraft began to flash across test fields and military planners debated the future of air combat, one final piston-engine fighter emerged lighter, faster, and more refined than anything that had come before it. It represented the absolute summit of propeller-driven technology, the point where aerodynamic mastery and raw horsepower merged into a single, astonishing machine. This fighter would claim the #1 spot on our list, the North American P-51H Mustang. The Mustang had already earned its reputation long before the H model appeared. Earlier versions escorted bombers deep into enemy territory, battled German fighters across the skies of Europe, and became symbols of American air power. But the P-51H was not just another modification. It was nearly a new aircraft rebuilt from the inside out to be faster, lighter, and more agile than any Mustang that had entered combat. Engineers began by stripping weight, shaving off nearly 1,500 pounds through redesigned structures, thinner skins, and the removal of non-essential equipment. They reshaped the fuselage to reduce drag and improve stability. Even the tail was lengthened and refined for better control at extreme speeds. Every inch of the aircraft was touched with one goal in mind: allow the Mustang to fly faster than any piston-engine fighter ever had. At the heart of the P-51H was the Packard-built Merlin 1650-9 engine, fitted with water injection for emergency power. When the pilot advanced the throttle and engaged full boost, the aircraft surged forward with breathtaking force. The updated Mustang blistered across the sky at 487 miles per hour, making it the fastest propeller-driven fighter to fly during the war. Speed was not its only advantage. The weight reduction transformed the way the Mustang handled. The aircraft rolled with new sharpness, pitched more responsively, and climbed with almost effortless strength. Test pilots described it as alive, a fighter that seemed to anticipate its pilot's intentions. It retained the incredible range that made the Mustang legendary: over 800 miles on internal fuel alone, meaning it could escort bombers deep into enemy territory while still outrunning almost any threat that attempted to intercept it. Production began in February 1945. Within months, more than 500 P-51Hs had been delivered. But the war was ending. Germany surrendered in May. Japan followed in August. Some P-51Hs arrived in the Pacific just as the conflict came to a close, their engines still clean, their guns unfired. None saw combat. The fastest fighter of the war never had the chance to prove itself in battle. Yet, its existence marked something profound: the pinnacle of piston-engine design. Engineers had squeezed every possible improvement from propellers, from piston power, from aerodynamic shaping. Nothing faster would ever fly on propellers alone. The world was turning toward jets, and the Mustang H model stood as a final salute to an era that had dominated the skies for decades. With the Mustang's dominance established, our journey through the 8 fastest fighters of World War II comes to a close. From the desperate innovations of late-war Germany to the refined engineering triumphs of Britain and the United States, each aircraft represented its nation's hopes, fears, and technological limits pushed to the breaking point. What is most remarkable is how close these speeds truly were. Only 61 miles per hour separated the 8th-place fighter from the champion at #1. In an era when survival often depended on a handful of seconds, each one of those miles per hour mattered. These machines were not just metal and engines. They were the products of nations fighting for their lives. So now that you've heard the full countdown, one question remains. Do you agree with the list? Or does another fighter, famous or forgotten, deserve a place among the fastest machines ever to fly on propellers? The debate continues, just as it has for 80 years.